Welcome to the Amber Nectar podcast, discussing the things we think about Hull City AFC.
And welcome along to the latest Amber Nectar podcast. As you can see, Andy returns after his absence last week, but it's Les's turn to not feel 100% healthy. So we're delighted that Chris Whiting has joined us for the first time in quite a while, actually, it has to be said. Long overdue return. And you were at the Wigan game. We'll talk about the two matches that City have had since we last did a podcast, and you were at the Wigan game. It was a frustrating night in many ways, wasn't it? But mercifully, right at the end, the correct results.
Yeah, it looked like it was going to be a frustrating one. There wasn't a lot between the two sides, which in hindsight is maybe not quite as damning as it seemed at the time, given their result at the weekend where they got a credible draw against Norwich. We huffed and puffed. It wasn't quite the Reading performance where we fully deserved to get back in it. I think it was a bit harsh. Draw would have been a fair result on Wigan. But that's what teams at the top do and what teams at the bottom do. Letting late goals, and we score late goals, first one of the season and long overdue. There
was some great typical Cityness potential at half-time in that game, wasn't there, Andy? To be in a position where we could really attack the playoff places against a side who'd not won away all season, who were leading at half-time thanks to a goal scored by a former City player who wasn't much cop when he played for us. I mean, the amount of typical Cityness that there was potentially at half-time was almost never-ending, really.
Yeah, you could almost feel that it just wasn't going to be our night for large parts of the night. I thought we started off all right, but it was similar. Half the game was similar to Reading, wasn't it? In that City never really got going in the first half, and hey, I know the result was the same, but I think, like you said, Chris, it wasn't convincing, was it? It wasn't. We burgled the win in some respects, and it's not the end of the world that happened. Of course, it's great that City can dig it out like that, because we wouldn't have won that game earlier in the season. However, we got the win, and it kept us in the hunt at the time. And even if it wasn't a great performance, I do think that City tried to do the right things throughout the game, even if those right things rarely clicked for us. But there was no lack of endeavour to go forward. It just didn't happen for whatever reason.
And I suppose you could say that there is that cliche about a team being a good side if they win from not playing well. But you've got to take into account that City weren't playing a particularly confident or well-drilled side, and still very nearly took nothing or very little from the game. Were you just grateful for the victory, or was there something actually to worry about regarding City that night, do you think?
No, not to worry about. I thought, like we said, we went about it the right way. We played the ball around as much. I think it was one of those nights where Irvine's passing wasn't quite what it could be. A few of the others as well, but we kept going. We did the right things. I thought we were a bit harsh on Wigan to say they were poorly drilled. I actually thought they set up quite well. They went three at the back and tried to worry us by having their full-backs pushed on to give Grzycki to try and take the attacking threat of Grzycki and Bowen away, I imagine. And so it came and it was working until the goalkeeper throws one straight at the feet of Fraser Campbell, and I think that set them back, and they thought, here we go again, and we thought, right, we can go and win this now. And that's when you thought they're going to push on, they're going to do what they did to Reading, they're going to create a lot of chances, but they never really did. Obviously, they got a plethora of corners, and I think it was just low averages. They got one in the end that went in.
Yeah, I think that period from about 65 to 80 minutes was the most disappointing part of the evening, even more so than the first half when we fell behind, because that was the time I thought that a bit of a head of steam might be built up, and where chances might start to fall. I suppose you give Wigan a bit of credit for keeping it like that, because I think I'd read that they'd conceded 2 goals in each of their last 4 away games before that, so they were used to shipping goals, but they looked a bit tight. I know they did ship 2 again, but they looked tighter than a team that looked like it was going to concede all the time, and I think they made it hard for us, and I don't think we just weren't as good as against Reading. And I don't know if that's tiredness, I don't know if we got a little bit found out. Bowen had another quiet game, and Grzycki didn't hit the heights. So without those 2 players, you are struggling a little bit for creativity.
Irrespective of how City are playing in home games at the moment, Chris, I mean, those people who don't go to matches see those photos that appear on social media of the East Stand, and you can see the word Hull still spelt out in the seating because there's so few people occupying that particular bunch of seats. What's the atmosphere like inside the ground?
I sit in the south stand, for those who don't know, and it's very, very quiet. It is around the ground. There's a bit of noise from the north stand, but obviously I'm as far away from that as you can be. So it's very atmosphereless. There's a bit. It's not quite as bad as I think you was imagining looking at the photographs if you've not been for a while. There is a bit of noise. There's still when they're attacking, there is a bit of oomph, but it's nothing like it used to be. Nothing like this team deserve. They're going on a hell of a run. This team. They've not lost at home this year. And they really do deserve the backing, and it's a shame that people can't come and see them, but for obvious reasons that have been well documented, people just aren't minded to come to the ground, and it's a crying shame for this team.
And you, when you go in the East Stand, what does it feel like when you're in one of those few seats that in the East Stand that are being occupied?
Well, the queues at half time are good, so it's not all bad. Apart from now, I think they've shut more kiosks, haven't they? So perhaps that one advantage is going to be lost, but it's just weirdly empty when you remember what it used to be like. And
is it like being at a reserve game sometimes?
Well, the atmosphere sometimes is like that. It's a bit echoey, and there's just nothing that can make up for the lack of people. There's the same people trying to make a bit of noise. You've got pockets in the centre of the East Stand, and you've got the North Stand gamely doing its best, but there's not been a good atmosphere at home all season. I don't think. I think there's been some enthusiastic support, and I think those who are going deserve credit for making it better than it could be. But oh God, it's awful, isn't it? When considering when you have to go back a few years for it to all be so different as well. There's
at times some games you've seen where the most vocal person in the ground is the opposition goalkeeper, the person you can hear the most shouting. And it is like, reminds me of reserve games where you go and watch the Stiffs in the 90s and you've probably not many people there.
A lot of the time in the 90s you didn't know what the difference was really, did you? Certainly in terms of the quality of football. Yoda Device, a bit of a mixed evening for him, wasn't it?
It was. It was a bit of a return to the early season until obviously he scores the goal. I mean, I've been a fan of Device. I think there is a player in there, and I think he's got all the action. He's one of the best headers of a ball. I've seen certainly at centre half for City for quite some time. There is a player there. It's just he needs to cut out the mistakes. I know we're not going on to that just yet, but I felt he should have cut the ball out that led to the goal on Saturday as well. So it's just if you can cut out those errors, be a very, very good player. But I suppose if you could cut out those errors, he probably wouldn't have been signing for us this pre-season.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? If you're going to be a Championship defender, you're not a Premier League defender because you are prone to errors, irrespective of how readily you make up for them.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if he cuts out the errors, he'll get sold anyway. So I quite like him, actually. I think he had a really bad start to his time at City. They all did, to be fair. That could go for the entire back four. I mean, most of the back four was new at the start of the season, when you think that Burke was in there as well, and Lehigh. I mean, it was a new back four. Well, Lehigh came straight in and did well, but Device looked hopeless, to be honest. And so to turn it around when the player himself will know he's had a rocky start to life in England, and he's turned it around for the most part. It's just it seems to us, I mean, none of us completely, you're good at football, aren't you, Chris? But none of us, me and Matt are awful at football. I mean, you've seen Matt play football, you've seen me play football. But we can still usually kick the ball clear when it comes to us on the edge of our own penalty area.
Can I just point out that Andy has never seen me play football? Anyway, continue.
I'm projecting, but I bet I'm not wrong, am I? It just it baffles me. It baffles me that a pro player can do that. I know it happens, and even the best players in the world do it, but it just is inexplicable, isn't it, when he goes and makes an air shot for about the 5th time this season.
It can only be concentration. He doesn't know how to kick a football forwards. It can only be that he thinks it's so comfortable and so easy that he just switches off and decides where he's going to put it instead of actually kicking the ball. And
with that particular instance against Wigan, though, that led to Powell's goal, there was an element of sort of panic and impetuosity with it, really, as well, wasn't there? I mean, he tried to hoof the ball clear as quickly as he possibly could when he could have taken one touch and got it clear. I don't think, although Powell was behind him, I don't think he was behind him to the extent that if Device had dwelled on the ball even for a second, there would have been enough time for him to be robbed of the ball. He just panicked, I think, in the sense that he thought there was more danger than there actually was, and ironically, conversely, perhaps he created the danger for himself by trying to get rid of it.
I think you can overthink these things sometimes. He just tried to smash it. He missed it, didn't he? Simple as that, really.
Which defenders do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when Jeff Astle missed against Brazil in 1970, it was because a Brazilian defender completely aired the ball to him on the edge of the penalty area. The greatest defenders in the greatest... not that the Brazil side that won the World Cup had a great defence, you never got to find out half the time because they were always at the other end of the field. But the point's there that defenders... When strikers or when attackers make mistakes, generally it's not costly. When defenders and certainly goalkeepers make mistakes, it can be costly, as we found out with Wigan's goal.
It's just weird that Device seems so particularly prone to this one very specific mistake, because he doesn't make glaring errors in other defensive disciplines. He's caught out of position but averagely, no more no less than anyone else. His heading is good, like you say. He seems to do most things tolerably well. He's got this one weird, glaring weak spot in his game, which is kicking the football away from immediate danger, which strikes me as the easiest one.
Powell shovelled it away well, though, didn't he? It's the sort of thing that we would have liked to see him do during his brief spell on loan with City from when he was here with Steve Bruce.
Yeah, he didn't get much for looking, really, though, did he, to be fair to Powell. I think he was injured when he arrived, and then played in a cup game in which he looked quite impressive without really doing anything. So I think it was a victim of circumstance. We started to play well. Livermore was back into the team at that stage and playing well, and at the end of the day we got promoted that year, didn't we? So he's not as if he's going to be a villain. He's just never got a look in.
Indeed. So now we know that Andy has always, and Les for that matter, when he's here, have always said that the playoff campaign was never really back on. But let's go to that 3-day period between victory over Wigan and the trip up to Middlesbrough. Did you think the playoff campaign was back on?
No, I don't. I enjoyed talking about it, but I mean it.
That's what he's like with Brexit as well. He just enjoys talking about it. He doesn't actually believe in it.
Even I'm sick of hearing about that now. But I was right. I enjoyed the fantastical possibility of it for a couple of days because it was still not wholly impossible.
But on the proviso that there is always a side, I don't know how exact a science it is, but people always say, and it does happen enough for you to think it will, there is always a side that sneaks into the playoffs with a late run. Why couldn't that have been City prior to the Boro game? I think we'll talk about in a moment.
I think what had done for us is the fact we'd won 2 games and not advanced on the top 6 enough. I think and it's not our fault.
We'd won 3.
Yeah, we had, but with the gap had only been close to 5 with 5 games left, which were all hard games. We've got a pretty hard running, haven't we? And I think it's that combination of things. We had 5 games left. We'd probably have had to win 4 of them.
We still could.
We still could, but look at the fixtures we've got. That's a tall order, isn't it? We've not been great on the road lately, and now we've got to go to West Brom next. So it never felt on, but I did enjoy the fact that it wasn't totally off. It was just nice to... It was nice. It's a really cliched and awful thing to say, but it was actually nice to just look up for a bit.
Where were you on all of this when it came to City's potential for the playoffs? I mean, Nigel Adkins had to talk up City's chances to keep his players sort of brains alive for the remainder of the season and not put the flip-flops on. But from a supporter's point of view, where did you see City's playoff chances after the Wigan game?
Yeah, after the Wigan game, it was probably about the first time that I allowed myself to actually, like Andy says, look up rather than down and think that we might actually stand a chance, because a reason to myself that we were playing Bristol City last game of the season, if they could hang on to 6th spot and we'd only have to be within 2 points of them, then it'd be in our hands. So we wouldn't actually have to get into. We could do a bit of a Sheffield United getting relegated from the Premier League all those years ago and be in the playoffs for about 3 minutes. With a late winner. So that was the first time I thought about it. I think the fact that Bristol City have a game in hand as well was always in the back of my mind, that you are relying on a lot of results to go forwards. But I think overall, I've always just thought how absolutely unbelievable it is to be even talking about the playoffs, when I was convinced, even as late as November, that we would be scrapping for points in a relegation battle at this stage of the season.
And when you consider how long we were in what we perceived to be a relegation battle before that run started, sort of December onwards, where we just couldn't stop winning, couldn't stop scoring, couldn't stop playing well, entertaining, being everything that we didn't think, with no particular blame attached to them, that this manager, coaching staff and set of players was capable of doing. For all that, though, we went up to Boro, where we weren't going to be the favourites, even though until they beat Bolton in midweek last week, they'd lost, I think, 5 in a row, hadn't they? And had dropped out of the top 3-4. I mean, they were still challenging for automatic promotion until the end of February time. We go up to Boro, where our record isn't great, and concede in the first half, Andy. And never really looked like we were going to get back into it. Not properly anyway. It was a sort of the City weren't terrible, but it was a damp squib, wasn't it?
I don't know. I thought they'd give it a bit of a go in the second half. They were a bit like Tiger Travel. They didn't really get there till half time, did they? But they just, I think they weathered a storm just before half time where it looked like it could get ugly for City. They hit the bar and it just bounced out. But then second half, I thought they had a real good go. They'd obviously got themselves together and they knew they needed something in that second half. And yeah, Campbell's header where he's got to score, really. You put your money on him normally, putting that in. Looked a penalty to me, I have to say. I thought they were lucky for that. And then the free kick in the last minute almost is a glorious point, and that you'd probably think City have a little better result out of that if that goes in, but it wasn't to be.
I agree that it's now likely that the playoffs have gone. I was always the most positive one out of the regular three of us, but even now it doesn't look likely, especially as Derby are 3 points ahead of us and they've actually still got a game in hand on both us and Middlesbrough immediately above them. You just look at those games against the teams above us that we had, starting with Boro, and then obviously there's West Brom and Sheffield United, and after Swansea we've got Bristol City on the last day. And Boro was kind of the one that we probably would have gone into thinking we had the most chance of winning, irrespective of the venue of the match.
Yeah, if you overlook the fact we've not won away to Middlesbrough in 33 years, then you would think that they're not a great side. They don't score a lot of goals, certainly at home. They're less than a goal a game at home this season, which is incredible for any side in the division, let alone one hoping to go up. That was the one, I think. If we'd won that, then I might have actually joined you on the playoff charge, Matt. But
what about a draw? That would have put us on 61 and Boro on 62.
I think it had to be a win, given that the gap just hadn't closed enough in the last couple of weeks. And I think at half time, City must have known they had to go and score twice to keep it alive. No.
The weird thing is we won 3 in a row, albeit against bottom 6 sides. If we'd lost one of those, which would have been a very typical City thing to do, and then gone up to Middlesbrough and won, then the points we would have had now would be, and the position we would have now would be exactly the same, but we'd be more buoyant. Is it, would that be because coming out of a victory at Middlesbrough would have made us more positive than the three games that we did win, if you see what I mean? That the mood would be slightly different, even though the position wouldn't be.
Perhaps so, because I think you do get an extra kick, don't you, from beating a side above you. That's only natural, whereas we'd put away 3 sides below us, and we'd still put them away, and there's
and they have to be put away. You only beat what's in front of you.
Precisely, but unfortunately, when something more obstinate was put in front of us on Saturday, I don't know. I think we deserved a point-ish, but the interesting thing is the penalty. I've watched it over and over and over again, and I still can't make up my mind on it.
And you were qualified ref. You would have had to make a split-second decision if that had happened in your charge.
Well, the first time I saw it, I thought no penalty. It's only since seeing it a couple more times, slowed down.
You need to get Dermot Gallagher to look at it on Ref Watch, don't they? And then he will make the definitive decision.
Peter Walton, who keeps going over, then watches BT. Peter Walton on BT is terrible. He thinks everything's a penalty.
Yeah,
right.
If someone sneezed in the box, it was a definite penalty. VAR, he's completely right.
Just to slow it down to 1 trillion frames.
Let me ask you this then. Before the Middlesbrough game, given that they'd won 3 in a row, the playoffs were within a grasp and a bit, with a couple of decent performances and results. But at the same time, given where we've been this season, the circumstances City are playing their football in with all the rubbish that goes on behind the scenes, it's a 2-part question, but it kind of could produce the same answer. Was there possibly too much expectation on City from some quarters, or maybe from other quarters, actually not enough expectation of City?
I think I've always trod the middle of the road, really, by saying the players weren't likely, but that it was an astonishing achievement to be where we are now. We should be. There was a point there in the season where I'd have been quite pleased if it had gone to the last game of the season with a chance of staying up. And here we are on 60 points, miles away from danger, and mathematically we can still go up. So that's amazing. And I don't think there was any real expectation. I know people have talked about the playoffs, but they've done it with that slightly dreamy look in their eyes where they don't really believe it, but it's nice to talk about anyway.
When we went up under Phil Brown in 2008, if I remember rightly, it was Warnock's Crystal Palace that just shot into the playoffs from pretty much nowhere. We were expecting Watford, who only scraped in on the last day. I think we were expecting Wolves and possibly Sheffield Wednesday to go in there with us, or whoever it was who finished third, because the top 3 were still quite close, and Bristol City. So, I mean, it may well be, you look at us in 9th, it may well be that that Sheffield Wednesday might still think that they've got a chance even though they're a point behind us. I don't know what their fixtures are like. And then Derby or Middlesbrough trying to chase Bristol City.
I think if you're going to say someone's made a late, well, Aston Villa have made a little.
They've made it at the right time as well, haven't they?
They looked gone a while. Probably what kick-started their season was coming back from 2-0 down against us. If they lose that, they might have started looking towards next season, but they really kicked on since then and had a few big victories. I think they're the team that's come from nowhere. Going back to your question about the expectation on City at the minute, if you was an outsider looking at this, I think you maybe would think City are in about the right position now we've sorted the back out, because that front four is probably a lower end Premier League front four at the moment. With Campbell's probably golden summer, and then you've got Guzicki, Bowen and Pugh, who would, I bet Huddersfield would kill for a front four like that at the minute. So I think there is that side of it that we need to make use of these players while they're still here, because obviously
give it 6 weeks and Huddersfield might have them all.
Well, I think Huddersfield been linked with Campbell today, haven't they?
Well, it's his hometown, isn't it? So it makes sense. And sorry to interrupt you there, Chris. I was just looking. We've won 17 games this season. So have Derby. So have Middlesbrough. Bristol City have only won 18. Villa have now, after their victory at the weekend, they've only won 18. It's the away form, and specifically the number of draws away from home. We've only drawn 4 away from home, and we've lost 11, which is a colossal number for any team that remains even on the periphery of the playoffs, but still have aspirations. Because I'm pretty certain Nigel Adkins is at least publicly saying we can still make the playoffs. But with 11 away defeats and West Brom away and Swansea away still to come, you can't afford any more.
No, you can't. But I think for all fanciful it seems to be talking about the playoffs, and all you talk about the away form, with 5 points off the playoffs, I can name you 6 points that we've thrown away where we should have beaten Rotherham at home from 2-0 up, QPR at home from 2-0 up, and
Villa away.
Not particularly Villa away. I think Villa away 2-2. We think that's a good point. A bit earlier in the season, we drew 1-1 at home to Preston, where they scored with the last kick of the game nearly. Bowen had scored for us in a game we dominated, despite not playing very well at that time. But there's 6 points that we've thrown away from just 3 games. That isn't even going, we're a better side than them, but we lost. I think that's 3 games that we deserved to win, we should have won, but we carelessly lost 6 points, and with those 6 points, we're in the playoffs.
I would chuck in going 3-2 up at Birmingham and not winning as well.
Yeah,
that's a candidate for that. I'm surprised you mentioned that Villa away isn't one that you would, because we were 2-0 up.
We were 2-0 up. I still think,
and when you're 2-0 up against a side that's roughly equal to you in terms of where you, because we were both mid-table at the time. Villa hadn't started their charge yet. As you said, that was kind of the catalyst for their charge. You could say at 2-0 up that you should be hanging on for the victory. It was
2-0 up. It was 2-0 up early in that game, and they got it back to 2-1 pretty quickly. And you are, in a full season, you are going to drop points from leading positions. I don't think it's not the fact that there was just Rotherham and QPR in the room that we are on at the moment, especially 2 teams we should have beaten in that spell of form. And again, just those 4 points puts us 7. So it's frustrating from that point of view. But again, I don't want to get away from what a fantastic job that Atkins has done this season to get us where we are.
The thing now for City, if the playoffs really are out of the picture, and of course if City get a victory in the game on Good Friday, then we're all going to start dreaming about it again, a little bit at least. But while the playoffs probably are out of the picture for City, I suppose a key thing now is to make sure that we, obviously, like any side, get as many points as possible between now and the end of the season. But specifically, I think it would be a feather in Nigel Adkins' cap to at least finish in the top half. But it's entirely possible that maybe 4 points from the last 4 games, and we could finish 14th or 15th. It's really tight.
Yeah, there is something in the back of my mind, especially as a natural pessimist, that thinks, what if we lose our last 4 games of the season and it all ends a bit limply? We could tumble down quite a bit. I'd love us to keep hold of a top 10 place. I think that would be fantastic. I'd be really happy even with 12th. I appreciate that's a drop of 3 places from where we are, but we've got a hard run of games.
Well, 12th could happen this weekend. 12th could happen over the Easter weekend, because Sheffield Wednesday can overtake us on points if we lose, and Forest and I don't know whether any of these are playing each other incidentally, but Forest and Preston can overtake us by winning, because they would have Preston by automatically from a victory would have a better goal difference than us.
So let's not let that slip. Let's keep the top half place, because I think we do deserve it. I think to show the fortitude to recover from where we were to where we are now, It'd be a real pity for it to just peter out.
Anyway, it's not like City go to West Brom at a crucial point of the season and win a game, isn't it, Chris?
No precedent for that whatsoever. It's a little bit later in the season than the great 2008.
That was February, I think, wasn't it, when we did it in 2008.
But we can go there, again, not sounding like nice, we can go there with no pressure. They probably no pressure on them either now. They're pretty safe, in fact, they're mathematically safe in the playoffs all, but we can all go in and just enjoy the van, I think.
Indeed. To go and win at the Hawthorns would be nice. What do you think the mindset of the play? I mean, we know that Nigel Adkins says all these wonderful things in public, that we keep going to the end until the playoffs are mathematically out of reach. What do you think behind the scenes is being said to these players about the remainder of the season, starting with West Brom?
There's no point. There's no real need to do anything other than go for winners there. 4 wins might get us very, very close, but even so, let's just go for a win now. We've only got 4 games of Bone and Krasicki left, haven't we? And also Campbell. So
and Pugh.
And Pugh, yeah. And
Henriksen.
Go on, couldn't we? Henriksen, Marshall and so on.
4 wins would get us to 70. If you say that, 4 wins would get us to 72. Now, the only reason I'm saying it is, yes, you would. It's not just the number of points, it's also the number of sides that you have to overcome. Now, with Middlesbrough, now that we've played Middlesbrough, we haven't got their destinies even partially in our hands, with the exception of Bristol City on the last day, by which time it might be too late, or their place in the playoffs might have already been cemented. But now that you've said 4 wins out of 4, 72 points should be enough for the playoffs, shouldn't it?
I don't think it would be this season. I think you're going to need more than that, because you look at where Bristol City already are. If they win that game in hand, they're on 60. 68 becomes the qualifying mark, and they're going to get more than a point a game in the last 4 games. So,
do you actually think that the current top 6, irrespective of the order they finish in, could actually be the top 6 at the end of the season?
There's a pretty good chance of it, and it would be quite a well-deserved top 6. I think. I quite like. I'd like something bad to happen to Leeds, although that does mean something good happening to Sheffield United.
Yeah, so but Sheffield United is clearly the lesser of the 2 evils, isn't it?
Well,
and Bristol City, if we have any affection for Bristol City for the sporting way that they took defeat in 2008, for them to get Leeds in the playoffs and beat them would be rather sweet, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be. I'd take it.
I think we all would.
That feels like a worthy...
Society would, civilization would.
That's a worthy top 6 for me. I think Villa have done really well to be that team that comes from nowhere. Norwich have been ace all season, and for all that we have obvious distaste for them, Sheffield United have massively overachieved, and Leeds have kept going all season. Usually they wrap up the title in October and then finish nowhere. This time they've won the title and finished second. So
they've also won the Europa League and the boat race this season. Yeah, we've not told you that.
So that top 6 feels all right. If we manage to steal our way into it, then I would take it, but I have no objections to the league table as it currently is. I tell you what would be nice is if we can pin Derby back, because they are perma bottlers, aren't they? They do this absolutely every season. If we could inch ahead of them.
Every other manager that has got Derby into this position outside of the playoffs with this number of games to go gets fired. Frank Lampard has not been sacked.
No, I think...
They do though. Derby way nonsense.
I think I was on last season of the Derby way when they sacked someone, or the season before.
Gary Rowett.
Yeah, but I think what the mitigating factor for Lampard this season from afar is he's trying to do it with young players and Richard Keogh. So with that handicap, he's done quite well.
We've still got Tom Huddleston and Curtis Davis as well.
No, really not. I saw Tomori won their player of the season. We were trying to link it back to Hull City yesterday. So I think they have tried to go down youth, and they might probably give him another season if he can hang on to some of those players.
4 ex-Hull City players that I can think of in that Derby squad, when you chuck in Harry Wilson as well.
I think they did all right in the Cup, as they've got some really good Cup results, which I think it does just give you a slight... I think it gives you a little bit more time, doesn't it? You can point to the fact that they've beaten Man United this season, and granted, there probably was some right shit kickers in the Championship, but he can go back to this. I'm building, own Man United.
A word for the Easter Monday game against Sheffield United at the Circle, because we won't podcast again until after that game is done and dusted. There's always been older Hull City fans will always tell you that the most needle there ever was for City in terms of Yorkshire derbies in the bad old days of the 70s and 80s was against Sheffield United, because we were always in the same division, and there is still an element of spice about that match, irrespective of whether it's home or away.
I think the Sheffield teams are quite. I always think, I hate Sheffield Wednesday, and then we play Sheffield United, and I think, oh no, I hate Sheffield United more. And then you play Sheffield Wednesday, I think, oh no, I do hate Sheffield Wednesday more. I'm not a fan of either, but depending on what happens on Good Friday, and if Leeds were to slip up and we lose again, I wouldn't be totally adverse to laying out the red carpet to prevent Leeds finishing second. And
I associate Sheffield United with thuggery against City and Sheffield Wednesday with bottling stroke crybabyism against City. That's probably just comes from the playoff final when they took 2 billion fans there, and apparently that was going to guarantee them victory. But it didn't happen.
I actually think we've got a chance of taking something out off Sheffield United on Easter Monday. I fancy us to get a point at the very least. They seem to be hit a bit of a wall the last few games, a couple of draws in games they would have expected to win.
Well, it's entirely possible by Easter Monday they could be 6 points behind Leeds. I don't know who they've got on Good Friday or around that early part of the Easter weekend, but they could be 6 points behind Leeds and probably thinking, well, maybe the playoffs is our destination.
Yeah, and then it'd be quite nice if that is the case to put a bit more doubt in their minds about have they run out of steam and beat them. Obviously, I've never been to a game wanting City not to win, and I don't expect that to be any different on Easter Monday. But if it was to drop Leeds out of that promotion place, then maybe I would not be crying into my pint after the game.
I think in some respects the optimum outcome might be for Leeds to just completely march away from Sheffield United in the first round of games over Easter, and then we can kick Sheffield United run down guilt-free.
Having beaten West Brom, which means it's 2 in a row. No, never mind. So.
Yeah.
All right, so those are the 2 games this weekend for the Easter break. West Brom away on Good Friday, and then Sheffield United at home on Easter Monday. And then that just leaves the 2 remaining weekend games against Swansea away and Bristol City at home. It's the Amber Nectar podcast, and so we've just got... there's nothing really off the field to talk about, so we can go straight back to our game from 10 years ago in the Premier League. And, I mean, we remember what we were all going through emotionally as City steadfastly failed to win all through the calendar year of 2009, with the exception of one glorious, dramatic, Minuccio-inspired night in Flint kit at Craven Cottage. We got beat 1-0 by Sunderland 10 years ago this week at the Stadium of Light. And it was a goal scored right on half-time by Djibril Cissé, who had weird patterns woven into his hair yet again. I believe he was offside from what I remember. I certainly think that the replays afterwards showed that he was offside, even though I'm not sure, because we were behind the goal he scored in, I'm not sure anybody could really say he was offside or not when we were watching the match. A match that was otherwise largely forgettable, because of course Sunderland were the same. In fact, they were below us in the table before the game started, so they were probably considering themselves in even more trouble than we were, and it was a huge victory for them in the end.
It was a big game when every game seems to be getting bigger and bigger every time we played, because we just couldn't get that win. The thing, obviously, again, like I say, it was a very forgettable game, which is not great when you're trying to talk about it 10 years on. But the thing I do remember was Phil Brown had given an interview just before the game. He was criticising a lot of Sunderland's players for underperforming, which is always a great idea. It doesn't mean that the opposition manager can just pin it up in the changing rooms and say, "See what this dickhead said about you." And I think that's exactly what Sunderland's manager did at the time, and he managed to get them the win.
The South Shields man and boyhood Sunderland fan.
Yeah, we weren't very popular that day on South Shields. And I remember Anton Ferdinand, after the game, where he played his one competent Premier League game, refused to shake Phil Brown's hand as I was walking off the field, because he was so incensed by Phil Brown speaking the truth, by saying he was not up to Premier League standard.
You're not a fan of Anton Ferdinand then? He was living in his brother's shadow all that time, was he?
Fair play to him. He played more Premier League games than I have, but I'm not...
I bet you're better at darts than he is, though.
Hopefully.
My body memory of you at that game, it's weird that you're here today, because the only thing I can properly remember is Paul McShane being sent out to warm up in the second half. He'd been recalled by Ricky Sprague only about a week or two before, when I think they did have some kind of defensive crisis, even though he wasn't in the side. He was on the bench, he warmed up, and Sunderland fans, of course, hated Paul McShane. They thought he was dreadful, and they were really pleased when he was carted off on loan to us, but of course they had to recall him. Ricky Sprague recalled him. Maybe there wasn't a defensive crisis. Maybe it was like Mowbray and Neil Clement the previous season, where they thought he's helping a rival too much. We'll have him back. But anyway, I remember you standing up to applaud him, and everybody else joining in afterwards. You sort of led the applause for the ex-Tiger ex-Loney, Paul McShane, as, and he clapped back as well. I think he liked us at that stage.
So I think what you're trying to say is I was responsible for Paul McShane coming back. We then scored the goal that got us promoted to the Premier League the second time. So basically, I got us promoted to the Premier League. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, no, that's quite right.
Good, I got you.
Well, let's face it, City that season very nearly didn't get promoted to the Premier League, and would you have taken the brickbats for that as well? Because we were in second forever, but kept losing right at the end. Do you remember anything about this game at the Stadium of Light? Because the one obviously the following season was much more memorable because it was Michael Turner's debut immediately after leaving us for them. And it was memorable purely for the tears that were cried in the away end when we thought he'd scored. But this one was it was a non-event, and non-events are fine if you win them. But the fact that it was a dreadful game and another City defeat, which took us to I think 5th from bottom at this stage of the Premier League with only 5 games to go. It was, and 2 of those games were, well, all of the games were difficult, obviously, but 2 of those games were clearly not going to be resulting in City victories. It was a complete non-event of a match, wasn't it?
It was. I read the report back from it earlier on, and that backs up everything that we're saying, and we're not unable to remember anything about it because it was a long time ago, or we were pissed or anything like that. Just nothing happened. It was
both of those are true.
They sometimes are true, but it was the nil-nilliest game that's never finished 0-0 because it should have been 0-0. There's a fundamental imbalance in the universe that still exists as a consequence of this game not finishing 0-0. And to be fair, VAR might have sorted that out. It wasn't an obvious offside at the time, was it? To be fair,
well, it wasn't to us because we were in the wrong place to judge.
Well, sometimes it even just feels offside, and I don't remember even thinking about it at the time.
It was a flick on, wasn't it? I think where he was off with a flick on, and he wasn't quite sure if he'd come off. Whose head it had come off, and it was just around the time where City were finding new ways to lose games. One week they'd be absolutely awful, the next week they'd be quite good and just not lose to a decent side. And then this one, like you said, it should have been, they might have lose a game that they played all right in. It should have been 0-0 to a controversial goal. It was just, every week it was a new way to lose.
Rapturous applause for Kevin Kilban from the Sunderland fans when his name was announced as well as an ex. Sunderland player, indeed, yeah. So with 5 games to go, I seem to recall us all thinking we were going to go down now. It's notable that the bottom 3 with 5 games to go actually remained the bottom 3, and we stayed out the bottom 4, as indeed did Blackburn, who were still below us at this stage. But I think we all thought we were going to go down at this stage, didn't we?
I think it was that nasty knot of fear in our stomachs, thinking, it took us 104 years to get here, and we thought halfway through the season we were going to be all right, and now we're not, and we're going to be forever talked about as Hull City. Do you remember Hull City when they got promoted that one single time in their entire history?
Like the Barnsley or Swindon of recent years.
But then we're always kicking around at the bottom of the table. They just came from nowhere to get relegated.
And we had Liverpool next at home. We were 1 point off the top of the table at the time. We still had to play Manchester United on the last day. The other games still to come in between were against Aston Villa, and we had Stoke City at home, and I'm trying to think Bolton, that's right, Bolton away, which was the penultimate game of the season. And actually, I know we're looking ahead here, but that Bolton game was the only point we would get for the remainder of the season. It was enough to keep us up.
Very surprised. I remember the game against Stoke was the one I think I'd pinned all my hopes, because Stoke hadn't won an away game all season, and even typical City, I thought, well, we might win that one and then they'll just be okay. And then I was so angry afterwards, I ended up walking all the way home to Hessel in a little huff.
What, from Stoke? Oh no, it was at home.
Yeah, it was at home, yeah.
So, did you think after the Sunderland game, despite what you've just said, that City would probably go down? Did you think that Middlesbrough or Newcastle or West Brom, any one of those 3, not West Brom, they were marooned, I think, but certainly Middlesbrough or Newcastle would have something to... Newcastle had the Shearer factor. He didn't turn out to be any good, but he is a hero there, and that could have inspired Newcastle, or it could have been, in another sense, like Solskjaer at Manchester United, it can inspire an underperforming side. Did you think that there was nothing going for City at that stage?
I think you did, because you couldn't see where they were going to win a game from. There was no hope where you thought, oh, they might win that. Might be like, you just couldn't win a game. They could not get 3 points, and you always felt that Newcastle and Middlesbrough and the teams around us would win the odd game here and there. Like you said, just because it's Newcastle, you thought, well, they'll win at home eventually, or they will get enough. And it was by default they stayed up, really, wasn't it? It wasn't because of anything that we did, really. The other teams were just so poor. We had enough head start on them. We managed to try and keep the ball in the corner while we were losing and still stay up.
Somehow, after that Sunderland game, though, Andy, we we had to find a way of regrouping. And I remember Phil Brown after the game, a bit like Adkins now, although in a completely different scenario, obviously, as buoyant and as positive as ever. I suppose when you're the manager, you have to be the mouthpiece for the club's future, and what you say can make a vast difference to the attitude of everybody else involved in the club.
Yeah, I think it sets the tone, doesn't it, for the next week, and there's no point in Phil Brown looking half suicidal, is there? Because
I don't think he would know how to.
No, he could have extremes of emotion, couldn't he, from time to time? He was not always a great one for hiding what he was feeling, but he had to just keep us going, and I did think we were going to get relegated at that point. Looking back, you can see that we were 3 points ahead with 5 games to go, and a goal difference that was much of a muchness by comparison.
With Liverpool and Manchester United still to come.
Yeah, true, but everyone's going to have hard games, and we still had Bolton away to come, which was semi-winnable.
And Stoke at home.
With the benefit of 10 years now, you would say, actually, we probably would have been favourites to stay up. Of course, it didn't feel like that coming home from Sunderland. I thought we'd made a really embarrassing mess of our one and only goal.
Yeah,